the question that remains is not whether. God does not measure devotion by knowledge alone. He measures it by covenant action. Prophetic Witness Edition. By Mark Tyson, Trent, Lichtenwalter. Executive Summary: Covenant, Rejection, and the Question of Restoration. This book examines a single governing question. Were the covenant conditions given at Nauvoo fulfilled, or were the consequences for failure enacted exactly as warned? Rather than beginning with modern assumptions, this study proceeds from covenant language, historical record, and ancient prophetic expectation, placing each into direct comparison. At the center of the inquiry stands the January 1841 revelation now known as Doctrine and Covenants, section 124. This revelation declares that the fullness of the priesthood had been taken away, specifies that it could be restored only by the personal coming of the Most High to a properly completed temple, and warns that failure would result in rejection as a church, with their dead. The revelation offers no alternate mechanism for restoration, no administrative succession, ritual substitution, or symbolic fulfillment. The historical record is examined against these terms. It shows that the Nauvoo temple was not completed before the deaths of Joseph and Hiram Smith, that no contemporary source records a visitation by the Father or the Son to restore the fullness, and that the saints were forcibly removed from Nauvoo rather than divinely defended as promised for obedience. The book argues that history must be measured by prophecy, not prophecy reinterpreted to accommodate history. Early Latter-day Saint leaders are then allowed to speak for themselves. Joseph Smith, Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor, and others openly taught that institutional approval was conditional, that priesthood authority could be withdrawn, and that God would raise up another people or a remnant if covenants were broken. These teachings demonstrate that rejection was not an alien concept in early Restoration theology, but an expected contingency. The study then widens to include ancient prophetic material, particularly from the Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah, the Psalms, and Daniel. These sources preserve an expectation of a final end-time servant, an interpreter of the law, priest, and witness, who would restore understanding, expose hidden misalignment, be rejected by many, and prepare a people for divine judgment and presence. This role is corrective and testimonial rather than institutional. Finally, the book preserves a set of modern witness claims, 2013 to 2015, as documentary record, not as proof. These claims are evaluated structurally, by whether they assert the same mechanism of restoration required by the Nauvoo covenant, direct action by the Father, occur outside rejected institutional continuity, and align with ancient witness patterns. This book does not compel belief. It removes ambiguity. If the Nauvoo covenant was fulfilled, the record of fulfillment must exist. If it was not, the warning given there must be allowed to mean what it says. The responsibility left to the reader is the same responsibility Scripture always assigns, to discern covenant truth in the presence of sufficient light. Copyright 2026. Mark Tyson, Trent, Lichtenwalter. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the author, except for brief quotations used in reviews or scholarly works. Publisher: Pioneer Publishing and imprint of Old Pioneer Press. Disclaimer: this book is a work of historical, theological, and prophetic analysis. It presents primary source material, historical quotations, scriptural texts, and claimed revelations for examination and discernment. The inclusion of any statement, quotation, or record does not require agreement by the reader. This work does not represent the views, doctrines, or positions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any other religious institution. Scriptural citations are taken from commonly available public domain translations where applicable, including the King James Version of the Bible. Other quotations are reproduced with attribution for purposes of historical documentation and commentary. Library of Congress cataloging in publication date. A SIP record for this book is available upon request. ISBN, to be assigned. Printed in the United States of America. First edition. Dedication. To those who love covenant truth more than inherited certainty. Author's statement of intent. This book was written to examine a covenant, not to defend an institution, advance a movement, or seek approval from any religious body. Its purpose is to place prophetic language, historical record, and covenant consequence side by side, and to allow each to speak for itself. Where a revelation establishes conditions and consequences, those terms must be permitted to mean what they say. History must then be measured against those terms, rather than the terms being reinterpreted to accommodate history. This work does not ask the reader to accept claims on the basis of authority, personality, or tradition. It asks only that primary sources be read plainly, that timelines be acknowledged honestly, and that outcomes be evaluated according to the standards established within the texts themselves. The inclusion of historical quotations, scriptural material, or modern witness claims is not an attempt to compel belief. These materials are preserved as record. Discernment remains the responsibility of the reader, as Scripture consistently assigns it. This book was written because a warning was given, a condition was set, and a consequence was declared. Whether those terms were fulfilled or enacted is not a matter of preference, loyalty, or inheritance, but of evidence. No reader is asked to agree. Every reader is asked to consider. Epigraph. But behold, at the end of this appointment your baptisms for your dead shall not be acceptable unto me, and if you do not these things at the end of the appointment ye shall be rejected as a church, with your dead, saith the Lord your God. Doctrine and Covenants, section 124, verse 32. Introduction. Why this question cannot be avoided. Every restoration stands or falls on its covenants. This book was not written to attack an institution, defend a movement, or elevate a personality. It was written because a covenant was given in plain language, and history followed in a way that demands accounting. The January 1841 revelation given at Nauvoo was not symbolic. It was conditional, specific, and explicit in consequence. It declared loss, defined restoration, set requirements, and warned of rejection. Those terms were not ambiguous then, and they are not ambiguous now. What followed Nauvoo, unfinished construction, violent removal, succession disputes, doctrinal alteration, and administrative continuity, cannot be evaluated honestly unless measured against the covenant that governed them. This book therefore proceeds by a single rule. Prophecy interprets history, not the reverse. If that rule is accepted, difficult conclusions follow. If it is rejected, the restoration itself collapses into myth rather than covenant. The pages that follow do not ask for emotional agreement. They ask for covenant honesty. Table of contents. Front matter. Title page. I copyright page. 2 executive summary. 3 introduction. Why this question cannot be avoided. 1-6. Part 1. Covenant and Condition 1. Covenant as the governing law. 7-2. Restoration and conditional approval. 11-3. Prophecy as the measure of history. 15-4. The nature of priesthood loss. 19-5. Fullness defined by presence, not office. 23. Part 2, Nauvoo and the Test of Obedience 6. The January 1841 Revelation, Group of Symbols, 27, 7. That which was lost. 31, 8. The requirement of a temple for the Most High. 35, 9. Sufficient time, and the limits of delay. 39, 10. Rejection as a church, with the dead. 43. Part 3, History measured by Prophecy 11. The unfinished temple. 47, 12. Endowments without restoration. 51, 13. Removal from Nauvoo, Group of Symbols, 55, 14. Succession without visitation. 59, 15. Administrative continuity versus covenant fulfillment. 63. Part IV, Early Restoration Expectations of Rejection 16. Joseph Smith on Conditional Zion. 67, 17. Heber C. Kimball and Being Cut Off. 71, 18. John Taylor on Withdrawal of Priesthood. 75, 19. Orson Pratt, Daniel Wells, and a Remnant People. 79, 20. From Conditional Approval to Guaranteed Continuity. 83. Part V, Ancient Expectation of a Final Witness 21. Isaiah's Servant Reconsidered. 87, 22. The Psalms and the Rejected Righteous. 91, 23. Daniel, the Ancient of Days, and End Time Judgment. 95, 24. The Dead Sea Scrolls and the Interpreter of the Law. 99, 25. God the Creator, God the Redeemer, and God the Witness. 103. Part 6, Witness, Record, and Accountability 26. The Role of Testimony in Covenant History. 107, 27. Witness versus Institution. 111, 28. Preservation of Revelation. 115, 29. Warning, Gathering, and Preparation. 119, 30. Accountability after witness. 123. Part 7, The Formation of a Remnant 31. Response and Separation. 127, 32. Instruction after gathering. 131, 33. Refinement and endurance. 135, 34. Expansion without centralization. 139, 35. Preparation for fulfillment. 143. Part 8, Fulfillment and Responsibility 36. Fulfillment without spectacle. 147, 37. Judgment as revelation. 151, 38. Agency preserved to the end. 155, 39. Endurance beyond anticipation. 159, 40. Responsibility after light. 163. Appendices. Appendix A, Nauvoo Rejection and Doctrine and Covenants 124. 167-172 Appendix B, Dead Sea Scrolls and the Final Prophet Profile. 173-178 Appendix C, Witness Revelations, 2013-2015. 179-184 Appendix D, Historical LDS Statements on Rejection. 185-190. Concluding Synthesis. Concluding Chapter, Covenant, rejection, witness, and continuity. 191-198. Optional back matter. Scripture index. 199-206 Name and subject index. 207-214 Author's note, group of symbols, 215.